Chris, what I really appreciate about you, well, let me just tell you what it has meant to me to have you as the narrator for these books, is that you understand their voices so well that the way you voice them is even better than the voices I was hearing in my head. And this goes particularly for Norma, more than anybody. And there have been times over the years when I've gone and listened to some scenes that you read to try to get them into my head a little bit better. And there's also been times, I'm just telling this to the audience, when I have sent her pages of text, which she has read into a microphone and sent back to me as, during the draft stage. So we've had some cool ways of working together like that. So you're going to read some stuff for us, but before you do, I'm going to, hang on a second. We've got a couple of microphones on. I'm going to just turn off real quick. I think we're okay. All right, before we do, I'm going to go into share screen here, and I just want to show you guys some pictures that will give you a little bit of a sense of what this newest book is about, and then we'll take it from there. So Miss Kopp Investigates is the 7th novel in the series. And once again, as much as possible, it is really based on the true story of the Kopp sisters. So I just thought I would show you a few pictures of the people and places and events that are real and how I kind of worked them into this novel. First of all, here's Constance. Maybe you've seen a picture of her before, but obviously she's a real person, and she's the person that most of these books have been about. So here she is. I don't have a picture of Norma, the middle sister, but I do have a more recent, I mean, in terms of the chronology of the novels, more recent photograph of Fleurette Kopp. So this is an image that was given to me by her son, and this is about the age that she was when the events of Miss Kopp Investigates actually happened. So she's in her, she's in her very early 20s at this point. So that's Fleurette. And then Bessie also plays quite a role here. So their older brother Francis has a wife Bessie, and Bessie's in this book a lot. Now the only picture I have of Bessie is of her as a much older woman. But of course in this novel she's quite a bit younger. But I just love this picture of her, and I just there's something kind of warm and sweet about her face. It definitely reminds me of my own grandmother, especially here in the kitchen like this. But anyway, so this is the only picture I have to go on when I think about what kind of person Bessie is, but there she is. And I'm not spoiling anything. I'm definitely not giving anything away because it happens in the first few pages of the book. We find out that Bessie's husband, Francis, the brother of the Kopp sisters, died unexpectedly. He had a heart attack and died. And this actually happened a little bit more after the conclusion of World War I, and I have shifted the events around a little bit and put them a little closer together in time, just for the sake of the story, really. But it all really happened. I don't have a picture of Francis to show you, unfortunately. But another person who's in this book and has been in a lot of them so far is this lawyer named John Ward. And John Ward is going to continue to play a big role in the Kopp sisters' lives, which is why I've had him in these books all along. And also, I just really like him. So I just think from this picture, you can see that you can kind of see what kind of guy he is. There's just this image just really gave me something about his personality. He just seems like somebody who's, kind of goofy and maybe kind of an adventurer and somewhat of a free thinker, maybe even for a lawyer. Probably a little bit of a flirt. Well, I have evidence that he was more than a little bit of a flirt. And here you can see him with his wife. And I just love this picture of her. This is Flora Ward, not to be confused with Fleurette. And she just looks like she's having none of it, like she's having none of his shenanigans. So anyway, I love these pictures of him, and he's in this book quite a bit too. So he shows up at the funeral to pay his respects because he's worked with Constance, and so he knows the family. And this is where he meets Fleurette for the first time and ends up offering her a job. So that's the role that he has to play in this book. So he's in there as well. And the job that he has to offer her is one that I believe possibly in real life, Fleurette actually did this work for John Ward. So this is not so far-fetched. I have plenty of hints and also ideas from the family that this is what she actually did. And so this headline suggests what this profession is. I was the unknown blonde in 100 New York divorces. And so what that means is, in those days, if you wanted to get a divorce, you couldn't just break up. You had to go before a judge and explain what had gone wrong and why you needed a divorce. And the judge could say yes, or the judge could say no. And if the judge said no, you had to stay married. So infidelity was a big reason why you could get out of an unhappy marriage. And so this little cottage, not a little cottage industry, a very big cottage industry sprung up around this idea that, let's say a couple wanted to get divorced, but the judge wouldn't let them. There was no obvious reason for it, such as cruelty or desertion or adultery. Then the husband could basically hire a detective, and the detective would put him in a room with a pretty girl and then burst into the room and take a picture. And that picture could be entered as evidence. And even though the whole thing was play acting, it would allow the divorce to go through. And so this was a profession. And so there's all these kind of lurid headlines from those days of women confessing that they do this for a living, and that this is the behind the scenes story of how people actually get out of divorces. And you can see this sub-headline here. It says, confession that rips open the operations of Gotham's divorce mills. And so I actually think in real life that I know that John Ward specialized in divorce cases. I know that he employed Fleurette, and the family seems to believe that this is at least part of maybe what she did. Another story that has a very vague connection to real life, but not the Kopp sisters' real life in this case, is that you'll see later in the book that there's a scandal involving a fortune teller in a swindling fraud scheme. And there were oodles of these stories in the newspaper at the time. So fortune teller was almost synonymous with someone who will try to swindle you out of money. And this is just one of many of those kinds of stories. And they operated under these sort of exotic names, and got, if they ended up in the papers, because they got arrested for finding a way to take money from unwitting female victims. So a case like that appears in this book. It's not anything that I think the Kopp sisters were actually involved in, but it was very typical of a type of crime at the time that women were all tied up in. And so what I'm interested in with all of these books is crimes that women either committed or were victims of, and so ways that women were involved in the court system. And these fortune teller swindles are one of those that I just thought was interesting, so I included it. And then the last thing I wanted to show you pictures of, you'll see that there's a plot line in here about Fleurette and her parrot, and Fleurette possibly wanting to go on the road and do a vaudeville act with her parrot. And that may sound kind of crazy, but in real life, Fleurette did have a big talking parrot named, and the parrot's name was Laura. And so in the book, the parrot's name is also Laura. Now, I don't have any reason to think that Fleurette was planning to go on the stage with her bird, but it's not so unusual that she might have wanted to, because there actually are a lot of vaudeville acts of that time that included birds. So like this is one, and then this one I really love. This actress she was a burlesque performer, and she was known for going on stage sort of draped in all these scarves and things, and the birds were trained to take them off of her and to gradually undress her. So I just thought that was so amazing that I wanted to include some hint of Fleurette doing an act with birds. And you'll see a little reference in the book at one time to some sort of scandalous suggestions about what this could be on stage, and Fleurette reacting to that. So anyway, these are just a few images of kind of real people and real or at least plausible events that are in this book. So let's get back to Christina.
Christina, in this lull, can you just talk to us about being an audiobook reader?
I've been an audiobook narrator for about 28 years. I started doing it because I was an actor and then wanted a family, and I didn't see how I could make the two of those things work. So I started recording books, and I really enjoy it. There's one thing about it I don't like, and that is the solitary nature of it. You are really alone in the booth, but I've gotten used to that, because I really enjoyed as an actor working with the director and working with the other actors, bouncing off of them. And of course, you don't do that. You're the whole show. But that's okay. You have a lot of control that way. So, and we've been recording almost steadily through the pandemic, which has been good. I go to a studio, and my engineer is no longer there. He's at home, but he and I, put our headphones on and we talk, get back and forth and have a grand time. So that works, which has been lovely. And it's funny, when I go into the booth, it is a really tiny, I can't tell you how tiny a room it is. I'm 4'11" and I weigh about 103 pounds, and I have a little tough time maneuvering in there. So, and there's one source of light that is in front of you. And I was thinking about this when I was doing a talk once on audiobooks, and I thought it's very much like the cave and the fire, that we always think of with our very distant ancestors telling stories. And that's what it always reminds me of every single time I start a book. I'm there with that little bright light right in front of me in a very dark, tiny booth. And I always think, well, here we go. And you always start off with, let me tell you a story, is how I always try and set it up in my own head. Let me tell you something, and then we begin together. So I always imagine all of you guys with me, in the cave at the fire. And honestly, as corny as that sounds, it really helps me. Not that you need much help with Amy's stuff getting going, but sometimes you do need as much motivation as you can muster. So that's what helps me.
And
do you ever get to pick the books that you want to read?
No,
or
I really
don't.
I don't pick them. I can turn something down if I find it objectionable, and that has happened almost never. I really, and my voice doesn't seem to lend itself to icky material. I don't do, we'll leave it at that. I don't do like icky stuff. I don't get called upon for that. I've done a lot of kids' books, which I enjoy a lot, because very often the characters are fantasy characters. I voiced a shark once and a blue whale that I based on Eleanor Roosevelt. It just fit to me. And I have a lot of fun with those. So, I don't know. I don't pick them. I have right of refusal, certainly, but haven't needed it. And we read, everybody always says to me, do you read the book? Oh my gosh, do I read the book? By the time I record, the recording is actually the third time I've read the book. I read the book for research words first. We have a research department at Recorded Books, which is very unusual. I don't think anybody else has it. So I will I'll email them a list of words, names that I can't find any place, pronunciations, foreign phrases, things like that. And they will email them back to me spelled out phonetically a week later, which is a joy. And that's such a lifesaver. And then I read each chunk that I'm going to do the night before I record it. And then I, read it as I record, of course. So I know there are some narrators who don't really read it much before they do it. And I don't know how they do that. I'd be terrified. I'd be scared that on page 300, I'd have a character say to another character, I love your German accent. And I'd be like, oh my God, what do? You can't go back and drop in every time that character speaks and put a German accent on. So you've really got to know these people really well by the time you get to the microphone level. So does anybody else have any questions for me at all? Or are we set, Amy? Are you?
I am back. Thank you so much, everybody. Why don't we do this thing for real? So what Chris is going to do is she's going to read a scene that both of these scenes happen very early in the book, so it's not a lot of spoilers. And this first one is a scene that has all four sisters in it. So it's all four of them. So with Bessie. So it's super fun to read, and it's the scene where they're in the bathroom. I think that's probably all I need to say.
From outside the bathroom door came a sound, a tiny, almost imperceptible sniff, a smothered sneeze, perhaps. Bessie cast a knowing eye at the gap between the bottom of the door and the floorboards. Florette looked over too, and could just make out the shadows cast by one, if not two pairs of feet. Enormous feet. Bessie shrugged. You might as well let them in. The doorknob rattled and Fleurette reached up reluctantly to grant her sisters admittance. They practically fell inside, comically like two fools in a vaudeville show, and Bessie and Fleurette had to sit up quickly to avoid being trampled. "I knew you didn't look right," Norma said, taking a seat on the toilet lid in the manner of a businessman sitting down to meet with his board. "When exactly is this baby coming, and how are we going to manage it?" "July, I expect," Bessie said. "It's enough time to get us moved and settled." "Moved?" cried all three sisters in unison. Bessie sighed and pressed the cloth against her neck again. "I didn't want to tell you so soon after the funeral, but you might as well have it all at once. We did just fine on Francis's salary, but there's nothing coming in now. I don't like to depend on anyone, but I hardly have a choice. My sister has offered to take us all in. They have plenty of room, and the children will get to live with their cousins." "Didn't you tell us that you moved east to get away from your sister?" asked Norma. "She didn't even come to the funeral," said Constance. "And what about the children's school?" said Norma. Bessie smiled a little at that. "They have schools in Illinois. And Della and I are older now. We'll get along just fine. They still live in my parents' old house in Springfield. There's plenty of room, and Della's husband is about to take over a medical practice from a doctor who's retiring. And you know, they're just far enough outside of town that they keep chickens." Fleurette suspected that she said that last part for Norma, thinking that Norma would approve of a farmhouse with chickens. Norma did not approve. She'd given up Belgium for this. She was digging in already. "Well, you're not going. You're provided for right here. You have this house. You have us. And surely Francis left something. Wouldn't there be life insurance?" Bessie put her hands over her eyes. The three of them waited, hardly breathing. Then she looked up at them and shook her head. "People used to come around selling life insurance. Francis would talk to them, but nothing came of it. I suppose I thought that if anything happened to him, I'd find some sort of work for myself, but nobody would have me now, not with a baby on the way." "But if you could live with Della in the countryside," Fleurette put in, not liking this idea at all, but thinking that she should offer it anyway. "Couldn't you live with us in the countryside? Let's all go out to the farm together and have a look around. We could turn the sitting room into a nursery." But Bessie wouldn't have it. "How are any of us to earn $1 out there in Wyckoff? Are we to raise 3 children on nothing but turnips and eggs? What about our..." Fleurette understood so little of their finances that she hardly knew how to put it. "What about our little mortgages from the parcels we sold?" "The little mortgages are paid off or else defaulted on," said Constance. "We have a few pastures leased, but..." Norma said, "But we'll need that money to patch things up out there once I have a look to see what needs to be done. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You're not about to run off to Illinois. The Wilkinsons are selling their house. Did you know that?" "Next door?" asked Constance. Fleurette had an ill and nervous feeling about this. "We'll sell the farm," Norma said, "and we'll move in next door and look after you." "Oh, but you couldn't sell the farm," Bessie said. "Your mother intended that land for you girls." "You're one of the girls that Mother intended the farm for," Norma said. "She just didn't know it at the time." Bessie was a bit weepy again, and now they all understood why. No one who is both pregnant and in mourning can keep a dry eye for more than a minute or two. But through her tears, she continued to insist that they could not sell their land. "You've all made your plans for after the war," she said. "You have things you wanted to do. Fleurette's going back on the stage. Constance is bound for Washington, and you..." But no one knew what Norma intended to do, and Norma didn't offer an explanation. "No one's going to Washington," she said, without so much as a glance at Constance. Of Fleurette's supposed return to the stage, she made not the slightest acknowledgement. I'll speak to the Wilkinsons right now. They asked me at the funeral what they could do to help, and here it is. They'll lease the house to us when they move out, and we'll buy it when we sell the farm. I'll arrange it this minute. Oh, girls, I don't know, Bessie said, but it wasn't much of a protest. No one believed for a minute that she wanted to leave her home and drag her children off to Illinois. Well, we do know, Norma said briskly. We'll be here every day to help with the children. There will be enough money after we sell the farm to buy the Wilkinsons' house and put some aside for all of us, with Constance working and Florette. Florette didn't hear the rest of that because all she could think about was that dear little room at Mrs. Doyle's, slipping away. She would have to set up housekeeping with her sisters, just as they had done before the war. Only now she'd be in and out of Frances's house every day, unable to push tragedy aside for even a minute. But what choice did she have? How could she stand up and say that moving into the Wilkinsons was fine for Norma and fine for Constance, but that she was having none of it? She could not. Not with Bessie beside her, awash in tears and gratitude. Having decided the matter, Norma went off to tell the Wilkinsons about it. Constance rushed the children off to school, leaving Bessie to compose herself in the bathroom. Florette slipped back into her room where Laura was waiting for her. She dropped onto the bed, and her parrot watched her expectantly, as if she knew that something was afoot. We might not be going far after all, Florette said. Far, answered Laura, filling the word with music and longing.
Yay! Was that so great? Oh, thank you so much. I love hearing it read out loud, and you got a ton of compliments in the chat as you were reading this, which we will make you awash in compliments again soon. But
I'll be awash in tears and gratitude.
It makes me kind of misty hearing that. Hearing that scene makes me a little weepy, even though I totally knew what was going to happen. We're gonna, the next bit you're gonna read is between Florette and John Ward. And I will just say, this was supposed to be part of the PowerPoint, but never mind about the PowerPoint. I will just say that John Ward is a real person. He was a lawyer who the Kopps had a lot of dealings with over the years. And so this is kind of really the beginning of a true story involving the Kopps and John Ward. And I added him into the series early because I knew he'd sort of be a recurring character. So there's a little history with John Ward. So he's known Constance before, and he showed up at Frances's funeral just to pay his respects because he'd worked with Constance. And that's where he met Florette for the first time, because he didn't know about Florette. He knew about Constance, but he'd never met Florette. So they had this one meeting at the funeral, and then they're kind of meeting up a couple of other times as Florette is sort of casting about for what she's gonna do with her life next. And one thing that I should say, and again, this happens right away, so I'm not giving anything away, is that Florette's been sick and it's damaged her voice and made it hard for her to sing. And this is, in real life, is true. In real life, Florette had a bad case of strep throat that forever damaged her singing voice. So that's an element of the story that actually happened. Is there anything else we ought to say to kind of set up to set up the conversation with John Ward, or is that about cover it?
If you're asking me,
yeah, you think that's
no? I think we're good. I think he really spells out what he would like her to do. So
yeah. Okay. Well, do you want to get on into it? Are you ready?
I'm ready anytime you and everybody else is ready.
All right. So we're fast forwarding just a bit to a little moment between Florette and John Ward.
Florette turned a corner onto Hamilton and nearly walked right into John Ward. Miss Kopp, he cried, as if meeting an old friend. He took a deep bow and tipped his hat. There was something so jolly about Mr. Ward, she couldn't help but be cheered by him. What brings you out this afternoon? Work, said Fleurette, or the lack of it. Isn't there always work on the stage for a pretty girl? It's dressmaking I'm after, Fleurette said, at the moment. Not my line, said Mr. Ward, but could you do something about the elbows on this jacket? He whipped off his suit jacket and presented it to her like a gift. It wasn't just the elbows that were frayed, the cuffs were an embarrassment as well. Yes, it's terrible, Mr. Ward said before Fleurette could make a pronouncement. Take it, please, before it destroys my reputation. How strange to see a man in his shirt sleeves right there on the street. But that was the sort of man Mr. Ward was, unembarrassed and unencumbered by convention. I can patch the elbows and replace the cuffs, Fleurette said, but isn't there a Mrs. Ward to look after your things? Yes, let's not tell her about this little dalliance with my cuffs, Mr. Ward said. Say, if you could use some extra work, we've lost our girl. Your girl? I'm not a secretary. He shrugged and gave her a half smile. We can always find a secretary. It's just that most of the girls who apply aren't suited for the other part of the job. And if they are, they have the damned annoying habit of marrying the client, and then we lose them. But you don't think I'm at any risk of getting married, Fleurette said. She was a little offended by the insinuation, although the last thing she wanted at that moment was a husband telling her what to do. You Kopp girls don't seem like the marrying types, he said, but I've been wrong before. There's no such thing as a Kopp girl, Fleurette said. There's Constance, and you know what she's like. I'm afraid I do. There's Norma, and you'd rather not find out what she's like. I'll take your word for that. And then there's me, and I don't take after either one of them. Who do you take after? Was there a saucy aunt or a granny with a noteworthy past? Now Fleurette was smiling. He brought it out in her. She said, I can only hope so. Are you going to tell me what the rest of the job entails? Well, Miss Kopp, in the divorce game, the only thing that matters is the collection of evidence. That and the fee, of course. Yes, I take it the fee matters a great deal to you. That's why it's called work, he called Jeff cheerfully. They have to pay you to do it. Anyway, we're looking to hire a girl to help with the evidence. Sometimes, you understand, the couple wishes to part ways, but there's nothing to put before a judge. No one's run off with a milkman or taken up with a stenographer. The poor wretches simply don't want to be married anymore. Can you see the difficulty that poses? Judges are awfully particular about finding fault and placing blame, she said. Exactly. Sometimes neither party's at fault, but one of them can pretend to be. Do you follow? I'm beginning to, Fleurette said warily. Of course you do. You're a bright girl. Now, in 99 cases out of 100, the husband will sacrifice his reputation if it means putting the unpleasantness of an ill-conceived marriage behind him. All that's required is a pretty girl and a man with a camera. Fleurette took a step back. What was he proposing? If you think I'm going to jump in a man's bed for money, oh, no, Miss Kopp, it's nothing like that. The whole business could happen in your mother's parlor. It's that cordial. All we need is a girl in the arms of the man. Why, we don't even need to see her face. It's nothing but a bit of play acting, don't you see? You only have to pretend to be the other girl so the wife can act shocked and sue her husband for divorce. Do you mean that you want me to be? Fleurette wasn't sure what to call it, but Mr. Ward supplied the term. A professional co-respondent, a lady, he nodded at her and emphasized the word lady, who is hired to serve as the second respondent in a divorce lawsuit filed by the wronged wife. The first respondent being the husband, of course. That's a fancy title, but it sounds like the sort of thing Constance's jailbirds would have been mixed up in, Fleurette said. He shrugged at that. One or two of them might have, he said, but that wouldn't land them in jail. I wouldn't ask you to break the law. I'm a lawyer myself, remember? I'm not sure what that has to do with it, she said. But this isn't exactly the sort of play acting I do. He was still grinning down at her, flashing that winsome smile of his. Take the jacket anyway. Think about it while you stitch me up.
Yay! That was so great. That was so much fun.
Thank you very much. It was fun to do. I love him.
So tell me a little bit. So like, what goes through your mind when you're trying to come up with a voice, like for John Ward?
It's really, a lot of it is in the rhythm of the writing. And I think you appreciate rhythm. Obviously, as a writer, you read your stuff out loud. And when I read it out loud, I mean, I honestly can't do him any other way. It's just what comes out, because I think he's got that kind of way. Well, boom, boom. You know, when you see enough Preston Sturges films, screwball comedies, he's got that kind of rhythm to me,
Right.
where almost anything could happen to him. And by golly, he'd find a way to, I can see my way around that one. Come on now, are you with me? You know, he's got that kind of, and the thing with John Ward that is so funny is that when I'm recording, I normally don't move my hands much. I mean, I can't, and I'm recording off an iPad. So I just do that with my finger to move the iPad along. And I squish my pillow in front of my stomach so that my stomach noises don't get recorded.
Wow.
But John Ward, sometimes I have to stop because I'm hitting the thing and I'm doing this, and and Howard will interrupt me and say, Christina, I heard you smack your chest. I think you did. So he's a challenge in that sense, but he just comes out because of the rhythm that you created. He really does.
Oh, that's so great. That's it's just amazing, and it is a thing. I mean, I read these books out loud, multiple times. Usually I read the whole thing out loud once before it goes to the editor for the first time, and then again right before it goes into copy editing. And you catch so many things when you read out loud. You catch really awkward phrases, and you catch repetitive sounds, repetitive words, and sometimes just a sentence that's just hard to get out. And I'll find myself thinking, like, I am not going to make Chris do that. I'm going to fix this now so she does not have to deal with that crazy mouthful of language.
Of course, you still put songs in, and that's not nice.
I know, you guys. When so the first time there were song lyrics that Florette had to sing, I'm like, hey Chris, can you sing? Just curious. Do you know how to sing?
I can sing. I have a good enough voice, as I told you. I mean, a good enough ear to know that I don't have a good voice.
Right.
I can sing. It's like, yeah. I can hit the correct notes, but not in a way that you want to hear. I mean, it's just not very pleasant.
Yeah.
So, and then it's there forever. That's what always gets me. It's like, that's nailed down. My singing is out in the world forever. Not that it's being listened to by millions, but it just.
It exists. And there was that one time when I put in song lyrics that had no melody to them because I wrote the lyrics myself. So usually the song lyrics are to a song that you can Google and you can listen on YouTube. It's a vaudeville song. And then one time I wrote some song lyrics and it didn't even occur to me. So I get this email, and I'm in France, and I get this email from you, and I'm like, and you're like, what would the melody be that you're expecting me to sing here? And I'm like, and I come from a whole family of musicians. So I send off the lyrics to my cousins, and I'm like, hey, can y'all record a little, just sing this? I don't know. Can you help me out here? And they recorded some stuff, but it was kind of I think it was a little too slow paced, and you wanted something faster, but somehow you guys worked it out. Like, you came up with a melody there.
We did what we could. I mean, the lyrics fit that kind of rhythm of listening to songs from that time, right, which I've done a lot of because of these books. So you can pull something together.
You can pull something together. And then, of course, you've also had to do a bird now.
Yes. Yeah. A little bit of a bird.
little bit of parrot speech as well. In addition to some foreign language stuff from time to time, some phrases in German or French or whatever. So yeah. there's been a lot of weird things over the course of this series, I would say.
Yeah, fun things.
Yeah.
And Florette sings in this, but it's really sad because her voice is really shot.
Right.
That was the one time where I thought, whew, this I can do. Not reach the high notes, piece of cake.
Right, right. She's struggling. I understand
Right.
struggling. Right.
That pain. Yes.
Well, you guys put your questions in chat if you have any, and because I had to leave and rejoin, I might not see earlier questions in chat, so you might have to put them in there again. But please feel free if there's something else you want to talk about here. And Sarah mentions that she loved the bird on Nellie's hat. One of the ones you had to do, which there is a recording of Miss Piggy singing the bird on Nellie's hat, which is, so fantastic. And Judith wants to know if we're ever going to see a film, and I don't know. So the movie the rights, it's movie or TV, but they came back to me at some point during COVID. All those rights returned to me, which honestly, I'm a little happy about, to tell you the truth. It ultimately ended up being Warner who owned the rights, and then they did a deal with Amazon, but it sort of went nowhere. And then Warner got bought by AT&T, and I'm like, do you mean to tell me that the phone company owns my Kopp Sisters now? I just really, seriously, the phone company? So I'm sort of glad, and I hope that somebody comes along who's honestly maybe a little smaller and more creative. I know there's not a lot of small independent creative film studios left, but there's a part of me that just a giant global corporation owns my story. It just makes me sad. So I don't know. Deb wants to know how long you spend narrating at one sitting.
I'm scheduled, the longest we schedule is 6 hours, but I never go that long. Generally I'll do 5 hours at the most, and a half hour of that is, lunch, and there's tea. And so I would say the longest I really do is 4.5 hours in one day. I find after that your voice gets a little bit ragged, which sounds funny because the microphone is this far. It's really, if you do this with your finger and you put your hand there, that's where the popper screen is, and the microphone is right behind that. So it's not far, and you shouldn't be shouting, God knows. But it's still, your voice does get a little raggedy at the end. And ideally what you want is for the voice at the end of the session to sound the way it sounded at the beginning of the session. You don't want the book to be a series of, I can hear this was the morning. We're winding down now. And now it's the morning again. I don't want you to hear that. So I get aware of that. And the engineers are good at saying, you're kind of losing it now. Why don't we call it a day? So that's good.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And so now everybody has all these geeky technical questions, which I also want the answer to. So how much editing do they do on the audio?
That is a really good question that I do not know the answer to. They have software now that is incredibly sophisticated. I mean, when I started doing this, they had reels of stuff, and they would cut. I mean, it was a long time ago in this whole process. And any noise, any extraneous noise was heard and could not be dealt with. We had to go back. I go into the booth again for retakes. We have proofers that listen to this with the book in their hands. And they go through the book listening to it with headphones. And then they will tell me if I missed a word, if I said they instead of there, whatever. I'll go back in the booth and re-record it. The engineer is also listening as we do it. He's got a book in front of him, or on his iPad, and he's watching very carefully too, so that we don't have to do retakes if at all possible. But then there'll be extraneous noises or whatever. But now they have software that is so cool, where they can get rid of a lot of that at the time. Noises that used to be heard. So
they can fix it in post.
Yeah, they fix a lot in post, but they don't tamper with voices and stuff. We're not at that point yet, thank God. But and are you? Someone wants to know: are you going into New York to record, or where? I used to go into the city. I live in Westchester County, up on the Hudson River. Now I just drive down county a little bit. It's a very pleasant drive, and I go to a really nice setup where there are 2 booths, and sometimes there's another narrator in the other booth. And, you know, it's lovely. There's a nice kitchen and, you know, because tea is a huge part of this process for me. So, you know,
Right.
but it's really very nice, very civilized. I don't have a home booth. I don't want to have a home booth. A lot of narrators do, but I just don't want to do it. I want somebody else doing all of the buttons and I just do the book.
Yeah. Right. I know. I can imagine. And I just have to know, like, what's the magic tea that makes your voice sound good? Because I'd really...
Irish breakfast tea from Trader Joe's with sugar and or honey and lemon when I'm recording.
Honey and lemon when you're recording. Yeah. The honey, I know, really makes a big difference.
It does help. It really does.
And somebody wants to know, and you're going to have to tell me what this means. I'm sure you know. What do you do? How do you avoid sibilant S's?
Well, the popper screen is there to, you know, keep you from doing those sibilant S's.
Sibilant S's.
Because when I was a kid, we were all tested I went to Ridgewood schools, Ridgewood, New Jersey, and we were all tested for speech in 4th grade. And I was pulled out to go to speech therapy. And it was because I had that kind of S where I didn't put my tongue in exactly the right place. It just went there instead of where it's supposed to go.
So wait, what is it? Explain it to me.
It's I mean, to my way of thinking, it's where your tongue is not placed the right way for an S, you know, and it's too snaky. You hear too much of it. Am I right, to whoever asked that? I mean, you may know I'm not great with technical stuff. I just, you know.
Okay, yeah.
But so it was corrected in me at an early age. So I sometimes will use it if a character's not on very much, because you don't want to, I think, have a speech problem for a character that's on a great deal. It'll be distracting. Yeah. But if there's a character who pops on and off once in a while, I'll go back to it, you know, or whatever.
Right. And then I think somebody asked, I just saw this question go by, I think somebody asked about like keeping track of voices over the course of a series, or
that's hard.
Know. Yeah.
Yeah. If I was technically gifted, I would be recording them all. I've told that Jim Dale, when he did the Harry Potter series, I mean, he had a staff working for him, and I appreciate that, but he also would just record each voice as he did them, and he had them stored up. Howard will marks every new character as they come along. So later in that book, if it's taken us a week to do, you know, go from one chapter to another, to the end of the book, and that character hasn't shown up since the beginning, he will play that character again for me. I also make notes. I make a lot of notes for myself, just handwritten notes, people I know, voices that I do for our dogs at home. There is a voice of one of our dogs is in the book. So I just put, you know, Honey next to that character, and I know what I mean, and I can drop into it at any time. So that helps me, but it's just, you know, that's how all dog people have a voice for their dogs. I think
people have a voice for their dogs, totally, yeah. Yes. And April says TV news people have that thing where they say street as street. I guess that's getting back to the sibilant S comment.
Yeah.
And a few people in the chat have mentioned, I do have this very weird Kopp Sisters Spotify playlist. And so someone very helpfully put the link in chat. It's just a bunch of these songs that have come up in the book. And it's also, there's a amystewart.com/book clubs. There's a book club page on my website. And I think the Spotify list you can get to from there. So anyone else who has questions, feel free to put them in there. Otherwise, we're going to just keep talking about this because honestly, I find it all so interesting. But yeah, please feel free to put any more notes in the chat. Now, when you're recording, are you going sequentially? You're going every single day until you're done, or what's happening?
No, I have another job. I work at my local library in the children's room, and I've been doing that for 10 years. So that's Monday through Wednesday. So I record Thursday and Friday. So I do those 2 days. I'm a fast recorder. I don't mean I'm rushing at all, but I will not brag, but I will say about myself that I go pretty quickly. I think because I do a lot of work at home. So I'm not going, whoa, yeah, what do I do with that while I'm recording? I already worked that out, I think, pretty much.
You come in prepared.
I do. And the engineers appreciate it. But yeah, I do try to come in very well prepared so we can just go through it. It's better for the book, I think, if we just go through it. If we stop starting, that's not how you want to hear it. you want to hear it smooth. You want to hear the story smoothly, and it helps you if I'm going as smoothly as I can.
Yeah.
And you also want to avoid what I call oral snags, things that will catch your ear, that will pull you out of the book.
Right.
Those are really important. And that's what the research department can do. If you were from New York, the New York area, and you were listening to a book set in the city, and the narrator said, we went down to Houston Street,
Oh,
that would pull you right out of the book.
right.
Houston
Yeah.
Street. Nobody says Houston,
Right.
that kind of thing. You really don't want to go there, and you want to keep the characters smooth and consistent and all of that. I mean, it's not rocket science. I think people are interested because it's such a thing that they don't see much. You don't see a narrator narrating, and I think any profession is fascinating, when you get close to it. I just think they're all kind of cool. Everybody's got their jargon and their tricks and all of that.
Totally. Right. Well, I think in your case, I just think the thing that's so interesting is that audiobooks have really just exploded in popularity, and people have their narrators that they love. I mean, I get I take so many compliments on your behalf from people who just love love what you've done with these books, and actually go out and look for other things that you've narrated. Because they like your voice and they like what you do. And I think, one thing that I think is that you do so especially well is men's voices. I've just always thought, like, it must be such a strange thing for a woman to figure out how to do a man's voice that doesn't sound like too much of a stretch, and of course vice versa for men voicing women. But that's an interesting subtle shift that I think you do.
Well, it's funny you say that, because a long time ago, when I was an actor, I was in a play called On the Razzle, and it's Tom Stoppard based a play on the original Matchmaker, what became the Matchmaker. And I played a pants role. I mean, I was 23, and when a young woman plays someone who is actually a male character in it, but we all know it's a woman playing it. That's what I was doing. But we didn't want to play it that way. We wanted to play it like, this is a young man, period. So we had a wonderful voice coach for the production. And I said to him, I'm worried about my voice. I mean, I've got to be a guy. And he said, drop that right away. Just get rid of it. He said, some men have a higher voice than you do. And he said, all you have to do is tap it. And that phrase has always stuck with me. He said, you can go up to here if you want. Men do that all the time. If they're upset or excited, they talk like this. But then he said, just make sure you tap low once in a while. And then you're fine. He said that low tap will register in the audience's ear, and they don't need you worrying about being a man. They just need you to, you can be up here, you can be talking for a paragraph, and then you go down once in a while, and they know that's, so what I basically do is I don't differentiate very much. Norma is she's all there. I mean, she's very low. She's very emphatic. Right. She has no ambiguity. And a lot of people would say that was more of a male thing back then. So I really don't think about the gender very much. And that is the most helpful thing for me. So
that's so cool. I think, I know. I love the way you kind of nailed Norma. I really like the first time I heard you do Norma, I'm like, wow, she completely understands who this person is. I think maybe even better than I do. It was so right on.
She's not burdened with ambiguous feelings. So
that's right. I know. I wish I was more like Norma. Like I wish I was so sure of myself all the time. There is never a moment's doubt or hesitation with Norma.
And she's my touchstone in the book. I find that when I'm reading the book for the first time, once I get hold of Norma and I make contact with Norma, then everybody else can fall into place. Basically, it's a funny thing. I don't know.
That's interesting, huh? Yeah, well, she kind of plays that role in the family too. I mean, she sort of anchors everybody and keeps them all in line and all of that. So we've got some time left, and I'm happy to hang out a little longer, especially since I had all my little technical snafus. So anybody else who has other questions, feel free to drop them into chat, and we will hang out here for a few more minutes. I also, and actually a couple of people are asking this question and I should answer it. A couple of people are saying, is this the last book? So here's the deal, folks. For the last year, I have not been writing a book. I have taken a huge amount of time off, which has been amazing for me because in 20 years, I haven't taken any time off. So that was an unexpected break that happened in part because of COVID. I am not writing another Kopp Sisters book right now. I am writing a different book, which I can't quite tell you about today, but in a little bit, I can tell you what it is. So probably in the next few days, and I may just send it out in my newsletter because I'm about due for a newsletter anyway. So you will have that soon. But I've left the Kopps in a very good place where it will be very easy to come back to them. So I don't want to say how it ends because I know that I'm sure there's a bunch of you who haven't finished the book, but when you do get to the ending, I think you'll be able to see like, oh, this is a whole new thing for them. Like this is a whole new era and it's actually true. So, it'll be something easy that I could come back and pick up later. So I've had very mixed feelings about it, which is why I've been kind of super quiet about it. I just sort of didn't know how to talk about it. So I just haven't been saying anything. And I felt like I wanted to know what my next book was before I said anything, which is silly of me, I realize, but that's kind of where it all ended up. So yeah, so that's where they are for the moment. When I first pitched this to my publisher, I told them I thought I could see it maybe being 7 to 10 books. And that sounded crazy at the time. That sounded like an insane thing. Like, why am I telling anyone I can write 7 books? How do I do that? And here I am 7 books later. So this is kind of what I signed on for, but also there's always the option to come back and do more. So that's where that is. And Kat says, don't make us wait as long as George R.R. Martin. That guy is brilliant at making people wait, isn't he? So I'm just going to go through here and look and see. Oh, somebody wants to know, I'll go ahead and answer this. Somebody says, how do you balance writing your art and the courses you teach online? Well, I don't really. Like I said, for the last year, I haven't really, haven't been writing a book. And of course, I haven't hardly left the house. So it's left me with all day, every day, free time. I don't have another job. I don't have kids. I have a husband who's very self-sufficient. So it may seem like I do a lot of stuff, but I have no social life, or at least I haven't in the last year. So really, it's kind of all I've been doing. And I do try to have a real variety in my day. However, I try to not sit and do the same thing all day long because I get bored and restless and stiff and sore from sitting at a desk. So I tend to try to mix my day up a lot for a lot of different reasons. Any other questions, comments, anything else you guys want to talk about? I'll just take a couple minutes more to see if anything else comes in. And Chris, anything else you want to add about your experience with this book or with the series that we can tell people?
No, just that I'm grateful for it. I'm always grateful when good writing is put out in the world. And I'm grateful to all of you. I mean, it's lovely to get out of the booth. You feel sometimes like you're putting a message in a bottle and you're just throwing it in the ocean and hoping somebody picks it up. So to be in touch this way, even with people who like narration or audiobooks and appreciate it, it's a real treat. So thank you all very much. And thank you, Amy.
Yeah, well, I wish more people did this kind of stuff. Like I love the idea of authors and audiobook narrators getting together more. So I would love it if more of this kind of thing happened because it's such a treat for me. It's sort of the coolest part about the book. Like writing it just sort of exists in your head, but then the audiobook I think makes it seem so real and just it's such a delight. I just put a couple links in chat and they're the same links that I put at the beginning. But I just wanted to put them again at the end. One of them is a link to where you could buy some signed copies from my husband, who's a book dealer, and there's a link there. We have very, very few copies of the paperback of Miss Kopp Investigates and lots of copies of the other books. So if you've got any you want to get as gifts or anything, he would be delighted to be able to throw a few extra books in a box for you. But then also there's an online tip jar here for Christina. So if you want to buy her a coffee and thank her for showing up and doing this, there's a link to buy me a coffee and it's all going to go to her. So I just put that in here, but I'll also send it out in a follow-up email to this, and I'll have a recording of the event as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. Thanks for bearing with me on my weird little technical glitches. And Chris, it's so good to see you after all this time. I'm bummed that we didn't get to do this in person, but in a weird way, I sort of like this better. And I'm really glad that we had a chance to, come together and do this for all these folks who would not have gotten to see it in New Jersey anyway.
Yeah, I'm grateful for this. I really am. This is like my favorite Zoom experience. My favorite Zoom experience. I mean, perfect.
Oh, well, good. It's my favorite too. And so everybody, thanks so much. I hope you all have a good evening, and I hope you all enjoy the book. And Kelly is asking, can you take your photos from the presentation and put them in your newsletter? Yeah, I think I'm just going to do something like that. I mean, some of them are pictures you've already seen before. It was just to see pictures of the characters, but sure, I'm about to send out another newsletter, and I'll do a little photo thing in there, and you'll see them there. And by the way, I'm doing another event in October with Murder by the Book. So it'll be with another author, but it'll also be about this book and about her new book, and we'll be together in conversation, and I'll send a link out in the newsletter as well, and it's also on my website. So there's at least one more event coming up about this book, and actually probably more stuff as time goes on. All right, guys. Well, you all have been delightful, and I'm so glad that you were willing to show up and spend an hour with us. And thanks again, it's Chris. It's so good to see your face and hear your voice. Yeah.
Good to see you, Amy.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.